I am looking at a PDF on my phone right now. It is a digital scan of a medical report dated October 14th. It weighs nothing, just a few kilobytes of data. But when I hit the enter key on that laptop, it cost my mother her reputation, her house, and the $20,000 she stole from our neighbors. The document is signed by a leading oncologist, and in bold black letters in the center of the page it says, benign. There is no cancer. There never was. And seeing that word projected onto a 10-foot screen while my mother stood there in a silk headscarf, pretending to be weak, was the single most satisfying moment of my entire life. If you want to know how I went from holding her hand at the doctor's office to handing her over to the police, stay with me until the end. My name is Sarah. I'm 26. And I work as a forensic accountant. That basically means I get paid to look at numbers that don't add up and figure out where the money actually went. You would think that with a job like mine, I would have seen the red flags immediately. I mean, my entire career is built on spotting fraud. But when it's your own mother, your brain does this thing where it deliberately ignores the data because the truth is just too ugly to look at. You have to understand, my mother wasn't just a liar, she was a performer. She was the kind of woman who would wear a neck brace for 3 weeks after a minor fender bender just to get someone to carry her groceries. We always joked that she missed her calling as an actress, but none of us realized she was rehearsing for the role of a lifetime. It started about 6 months ago on a Tuesday. I remember the day exactly because the air conditioning in my apartment had broken and the heat was making me nauseous. My mom called me over for an emergency family meeting, and the tone of her voice was so hollow, so practiced, that my stomach dropped before I even got in the car. When I arrived, the house smelled like lavender and bleach, too clean, like she was sanitizing the scene of a crime before it happened. She sat me and my brother down at the kitchen table, the one with the sticky varnish that always clung to your elbows, and she basically told us that the doctors had found a mass. She didn't just say she was sick, she painted a picture. She talked about stage 3, about aggressive cells, about how she might not make it to Christmas. I remember looking at her hands. They weren't shaking. They were perfectly still, resting on the table like she was posing for a portrait. My brother immediately started crying, making these awful, choking sounds, and my first instinct was to reach out and comfort him. But looking back, I realized my mom wasn't looking at us. She was looking at the reflection in the microwave door, checking her angle. She looked tragic. She looked brave. She looked exactly like she wanted to look. Have you ever had a gut feeling that someone was lying to you about something serious, but you felt like a monster for even doubting them? And so, the production began. That's really what it was. It wasn't a treatment plan. It was a production schedule. Within a week, she decided she needed to take control of the narrative. She didn't want to wait for the chemo to take her hair. She wanted to do it on her own terms. She organized what she called a bravery bash. I'm not kidding. She literally sent out evites to the entire neighborhood, the church group, and half my cousin's graduating class, inviting them to come watch her shave her head. I tried to talk her out of it. I told her it felt morbid, that we should keep this private. But she looked at me with these wide, wet eyes and basically accused me of being ashamed of her. She said she needed the support of her community to survive this battle. So, I shut up. I played the dutiful daughter. The night of the party, the living room was packed. There were easily 50 people there, drinking cheap Chardonnay and eating cheese cubes. The air was thick with this weird performative grief. Everyone was whispering, glancing at my mom like she was already a ghost. And then, the music stopped. She sat in a wooden chair in the center of the room, draped in a barber's cape. She handed the clippers to my aunt, but then she paused. She looked around the room, made eye contact with the wealthiest neighbor we have, a guy who owns 3 car dealerships, and gave this brave, trembling nod. The sound of those clippers is something I will never forget. It was this angry, buzzing drone that cut through the silence. Clump by clump, her thick, dyed blonde hair fell onto the hardwood floor. It looked like dead animals scattered around her feet. People were openly sobbing, I mean full-on wailing. My mom had tears streaming down her face, but I was standing at the back. And I saw something that chilled me to the bone. When the clippers finished and her scalp was bare, she didn't look devastated. She looked thrilled. She ran a hand over her bald head and smiled this weak, saintly smile, and the room erupted in applause. Literally, they gave her a standing ovation for having cancer. That was the launch event. By the next morning, the GoFundMe was live. She titled it Martha's Miracle Fund. The goal was $20,000. She claimed her insurance wouldn't cover some experimental holistic immune therapy in Mexico. I asked her for the details of the clinic, just to make sure it was legitimate. I told her I could run the billing through my FSA. She got incredibly defensive. She basically snapped at me, saying that I was stressing her out with logistics when she should be focusing on healing. She said the clinic was off the grid for privacy reasons. Red flag number 1. But again, who accuses their bald, dying mother of fraud? The money started pouring in. It was insane. $50 from the mailman, $500 from the church deacon. The guy with the car dealerships dropped a check for $5,000. Every time a notification dinged on her phone, her eyes would light up. It was like a dopamine hit. She wasn't checking her white blood cell count, she was checking her bank balance. For the next 3 months, my life was hell. I moved in to take care of her because she claimed she was too weak to lift a spoon. I was cooking her meals, cleaning her house, and managing her appointments. But here is where it gets crazy. She never let me drive her to the doctor. Not once. She would always insist on taking an Uber or having a friend drive her because she didn't want me to see her hooked up to the machines. She said it would be too traumatic for me. I was exhausted. I was working 40 hours a week and then coming home to wait on her hand and foot. My hair actually started falling out in the shower from the stress. I was losing weight, my skin was gray, and I wasn't sleeping. Meanwhile, she seemed to be glowing. For a dying woman, she had incredible skin. She would spend her days online shopping for comfort items, silk pajamas, high-end noise-canceling headphones, expensive organic supplements. The packages started piling up in the hallway. It looked like Christmas every day. And the smell of the house changed. It didn't smell like sickness anymore. It smelled like money. It smelled like entitlement. I remember walking past her bedroom door one afternoon when she thought I was at work. I heard her on the phone. Her voice wasn't weak or raspy. It was sharp. She was laughing, a loud, full-bellied laugh that I hadn't heard in years. She was saying something about tropical weather and swim-up bars. I froze in the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I told myself maybe she was just dreaming. Maybe she was talking about a visualization exercise. But then the laughter stopped abruptly, and I heard her say, in a hushed, conspiratorial tone, that she had to go because the warden might be home soon. The warden. That was me. The daughter wiping down her counters and paying her electric bill. That was the moment the seed was planted. I didn't want to believe it, but the accountant in me woke up. I started watching her. Not as a daughter, but as an auditor. I started noticing the little things. She claimed the chemo made her nauseous, but I found wrappers for spicy tacos buried at the bottom of the kitchen trash can. She claimed she could barely walk, but the dust on the top shelf of the pantry, where she hid the good chocolate, was disturbed. But the real breaking point, the moment that turned me from a caregiver into a hunter, happened on a Thursday night. And it was the night she told me she needed more money. So, fast forward to a Thursday evening. I had just finished a 12-hour shift auditing a construction firm that was clearly laundering money, so my brain was already in this hypercritical detective mode. I came home, and the house was dark. Usually, the TV would be blaring some reality show, but it was dead silent. I walked into the kitchen, and there was a note on the counter. It was written in her shaky, I'm sick handwriting. You know, where she deliberately let the pen drag to look frail. The note basically said she was feeling very low and had gone to bed early, and that she didn't want to be disturbed. I remember staring at that note and feeling this weird cocktail of relief and suspicion. Relief, because I didn't have to listen to her complain about her phantom pains for an hour, but suspicion because the handwriting looked forced. Like, if you look closely, the loops on the Y and the G were too controlled. It was the handwriting of someone pretending to have tremors, not someone who actually had them. I heated up some leftover lasagna, standing over the sink and eating it cold because I didn't have the energy to find a plate. And that's when I heard it. A thud. It wasn't coming from her bedroom upstairs. It was coming from the garage. Now, you have to understand, our garage is not attached to the main hallway. You have to go through the laundry room to get there. It's a mess. Stacks of old magazines, holiday decorations from 1998, just boxes upon boxes of junk, and it is freezing in there. My mother, the woman who claimed she caught a chill if the thermostat dropped below 75 degrees, should not have been in the garage. I put the fork down. The lasagna turned to lead in my stomach. I walked to the laundry room door, my socks sliding on the linoleum, and I just listened. I heard the distinct sound of plastic scraping against concrete. Heavy plastic. The kind of sound a 50-gallon storage bin makes when you drag it across the floor. My first instinct was that maybe she had fallen. Maybe she had wandered in there in a delirium and collapsed, pulling a box down with her. So I didn't just walk in. I ran. I threw the door open, ready to catch her, ready to call 911, ready to be the savior again. But she wasn't on the floor. The garage light was buzzing. That awful yellow sodium light that makes everything look sick. And there she was. My stage 3 mother, the woman who needed a walker to get to the mailbox. I was standing on a step stool. She was reaching up to the highest shelf, wrestling with a heavy plastic bin labeled Important Docs. She had this look of intense concentration on her face, her tongue poking out the side of her mouth. Her arms were extended above her head, holding at least 20 pounds of paper and plastic. She looked strong. She looked capable. She looked absolutely fine. Have you ever seen someone drop their mask so fast it actually made you dizzy? The second the door slammed against the wall, she froze. It was like watching a deer in headlights, but the deer was wearing expensive Lululemon leggings and a chemo beanie. For a split second, she didn't move. She just held that heavy box above her head, caught red-handed in a display of physical strength that should have been impossible for someone in her condition. And then, the performance rebooted. It was terrifying to watch. In real time, I watched her shoulders slump. I watched her knees buckle. She let out this theatrical gasp, dropped the box, which crashed loudly, spilling papers everywhere, and basically collapsed onto the concrete, clutching her chest. She started hyperventilating, saying that she had gotten confused, that she was looking for her living will because she was scared she wouldn't wake up tomorrow. She started crying, these big, heaving sobs, saying the brain fog had made her wander into the garage and she didn't know where she was. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. I stood there, staring at her huddled on the cold floor. A month ago, I would have rushed to her side. I would have wrapped her in a blanket and apologized for startling her. But this time, I just felt cold. I looked at the scattered papers on the floor. They weren't legal documents. They were old photo albums and travel brochures. I helped her up, but I didn't hug her. I felt like I was handling a mannequin. I walked her back to bed, listened to her whimper about how cruel I was for sneaking up on her, and tucked her in. She asked for water. I got it. She asked for her pain meds. I gave them to her. But when I walked out of that room, I didn't go to sleep. I went back to the garage. I needed to know what was in that box. Why was she risking her frail act to get to it right then? I sat on the freezing concrete floor, surrounded by dust bunnies and the smell of gasoline, and I started sifting through the mess she had dropped. Most of it was junk. Old tax returns, warranty cards for appliances we didn't own anymore. But then, tucked inside a faded manila envelope that had slid under the workbench, I found it. It was a glossy folder. On the front, it had a picture of a massive cruise ship cutting through turquoise water. The logo said Royal Caribbean. I opened it. Inside wasn't just a brochure. It was a booking confirmation. I felt the blood drain from my face. I held the paper under the yellow light, squinting to make sure I was reading it right. It was a reservation for the Ultimate World Cruise leg, a luxury suite. The dates were for next month. The exact dates she claimed she would be at the holistic clinic in Mexico receiving her life-saving treatment. I read the cost breakdown. The deposit was $5,000. The remaining balance was $15,000. I sat there, shivering in the garage, and I did the math. The GoFundMe had just hit $22,000 yesterday. The math was perfect. It was cleaner than any audit I had ever done. At that moment, I looked at the date on the booking. She had made this reservation 3 days after she shaved her head. I mean, honestly, I couldn't wrap my head around the level of premeditation. This wasn't a panic move. This wasn't a woman scared of dying who wanted one last hurrah. This was a heist. She had used her own body, her own hair, as the prop to rob her friends and family so she could drink margaritas on a floating hotel. And here is where it gets complicated. You'd think I would be filled with pure rage, right? You'd think I would march upstairs and scream at her until the neighbors called the cops. But I didn't. Instead, I felt this crushing wave of grief. I looked at a photo that had spilled out of the box. It was from when I was 10 years old. I had the flu, really bad. High fever, hallucinations, the works. My mom had stayed up with me for 3 nights straight. I remember her cool hand on my forehead. I remember her feeding me ice chips and whispering that she wouldn't let anything happen to me. She was my hero then. She was the safest place in the world. I sat there on the garage floor, holding that picture in one hand and the cruise receipt in the other, and I cried. Not for the money, not for the lie. I cried because I realized that the mother who fed me ice chips was dead. She didn't exist anymore. The woman upstairs wasn't my mom. She was a parasite wearing my mother's face. That was the empathy beat. That was the moment I mourned her. I gave myself 10 minutes to grieve the relationship I thought I had. I let myself feel the heartbreak of realizing that she didn't love me. She just used me as a prop in her tragedy. And then, just like that, the tears stopped. The sadness evaporated, and something else rushed in to fill the vacuum. It was cold, sharp, and incredibly focused. I looked at the receipt again. I looked at the non-refundable stamp. She wanted a vacation? Fine. I would give her a vacation. But first, I was going to ruin her. I realized that if I confronted her now, she would just spin it. She would say the cruise was a spiritual retreat recommended by her doctor. She would say I was invading her privacy. She would cry, and everyone would believe the dying woman over the cold, ungrateful daughter. She had the social capital. She had the sympathy. I had nothing but a piece of paper. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. I needed the medical records. And I needed to make sure that when the truth came out, there was no room for her to act her way out of it. I stood up, dusted off my pants, and folded the cruise receipt. I didn't put it back in the box. I put it in my pocket. I cleaned up the mess in the garage, putting everything back exactly how it was, so she wouldn't know I had seen it. I walked back into the house, and the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. I went into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. My hands were perfectly steady. The ringing in my ears from earlier had stopped. I was done being the nurse. I was done being the victim. It was time to go to work. I had an audit to conduct, and this time, the fraud was going to cost the CEO everything. So the next morning, the house was quiet again. The adrenaline from the garage had settled into this cold, hard knot in my chest. I went to work, sat at my desk, and stared at spreadsheets for 8 hours. But my mind was running a completely different calculation. I had the motive, the cruise. But I needed the weapon. I needed the medical records that proved she was lying about the cancer itself. Because without that, she could just claim the cruise was a misunderstanding or a gift. I needed to prove she was healthy. Opportunity knocked about 2 days later, and honestly, it was almost too easy. It was like the universe was finally tired of her nonsense too. My mom called me into the living room. She was lying on the couch, surrounded by pillows, wearing those expensive noise-canceling headphones she bought with the donation money. She took them off slowly, wincing like the movement caused her physical pain, and held out her iPad. She told me that her chemo brain was making it impossible to remember her passwords, and that her hands were too shaky to type. She wanted me to log into her bank account to check a deposit from a distant aunt. I looked at her hands. They were perfectly still. But I didn't say anything. I just took the iPad. "Sure, Mom," I said. "I'll handle it." I walked into the kitchen, sat down at the island, and put the iPad flat on the counter. This was it. This was the window. I didn't go to the bank app first. That would be amateur hour. I went straight to her email. Now, you have to understand, my mother is not a tech genius. She uses the same password for everything. I tried her birthday. Nothing. I tried her anniversary. Nothing. Then I tried the date of her diagnosis. Click. The lock screen opened. I mean, the narcissism, right? She used the date she became the center of attention as her passcode. I went straight to the search bar in her email and typed Dr. Henderson. That was the oncologist she claimed was treating her. Dozens of emails popped up. Appointment reminders, billing statements, the usual stuff. But then I saw an email from the patient portal notification system with the subject line. New test results available. CT scan abdomen/pelvis. The date on the email was October 14th. That was 3 days before she shaved her head. My heart started hammering against my ribs. But my hands were steady. I was in work mode now. I was the auditor. I tapped the link. It took me to the medical portal login. Thankfully, her browser had saved the password. Have you ever been terrified to find the truth because you knew that once you saw it, you could never go back to the way things were? I clicked View Report. The screen loaded slowly, the little spinning wheel mocking me. And then, the PDF popped up. I zoomed in. I didn't read the header. I didn't read the patient info. I scrolled straight to the bottom, to the section labeled Impression. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am going to read you exactly what it said, word for word, because I burned this image into my retina. The report read, Impression. No evidence of metastatic disease. No lymphadenopathy. Solid organs of the abdomen and pelvis appear unremarkable. No acute abnormality detected. Findings. Benign. Benign. There it was. 6 letters that destroyed my family. I sat there in the kitchen, staring at that word. The refrigerator hummed. The ice maker clattered. Upstairs, I could hear my mother singing along to a Fleetwood Mac song, her voice strong and clear. She didn't have cancer. She didn't have a mass. She had a clean bill of health and a moral vacuum where her soul used to be. I felt the blood drain from my face. My extremities went cold, like I had been dipped in ice water. But I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just felt this rush of absolute clinical clarity. It was the feeling I get when I finally find the missing zero in a spreadsheet that balances the books. But I wasn't done. I needed the money trail. I switched apps and opened her bank statement. I filtered the transactions for the last 60 days. It was a massacre. I saw the incoming transfers from GoFundMe. Deposit, Stripe, Martha's Miracle Fund plus $2,450. Deposit, Stripe, Martha's Miracle Fund plus $1,200. And then, right next to them, the outgoing payments. Payment, Royal Caribbean Cruise Line minus $5,000. Payment, Nordstrom minus $450. Payment, Ticketmaster, Adele Las Vegas, minus $800. She was literally spending the life-saving treatment money on concert tickets. I took screenshots of everything: the medical report, the bank transfers, the email confirmations. I emailed them to my secure work account. Then I saved them to a hidden folder on my phone. Then I uploaded them to a cloud drive she didn't know existed. I wiped the browser history on the iPad. I closed the apps. I walked back into the living room. My mom looked up, giving me that weak, pitiful smile. She asked if I had figured it out. She told me I was such a good daughter for helping her when her brain was mush. I looked her dead in the eye. For a second, I thought I was going to vomit on the white carpet. But I swallowed it down. I handed her the iPad and told her everything was taken care of. "Thanks, sweetie," she said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "I know, Mom," I said. "I don't know what you'd do without me either." She didn't catch the tone. She was too busy picking out a playlist for her nap. I went to my room and closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the screenshots on my phone again. The evidence was irrefutable. I had the smoking gun. I had the body. Now I just needed to build the gallows. Basically, once I had the screenshots, the fear just evaporated. It was replaced by this cold, mechanical efficiency. I stopped seeing her as my mother and started seeing her as a liability on a balance sheet that needed to be written off. I didn't yell, I didn't scream, and I definitely didn't confront her. Confrontation is messy. Confrontation gives the other person a chance to come up with a lie. I didn't want an argument. I wanted an execution. The opportunity dropped into my lap 2 days later. My mom, in all her infinite wisdom and narcissism, decided that her 50th birthday shouldn't just be a party. It should be a grand fundraising gala. She literally called it that. She rented out the community center hall, hired a caterer, using the donation money, obviously. Yinan told everyone that all proceeds from the night would go towards her journey to wellness. And then she made the mistake that ended her life. She asked me to make the tribute video. She looked at me with those fake sad eyes and said she wanted a montage of her life, set to that fight song to show everyone how hard she was battling. She handed me a USB drive full of photos, her as a baby, her at her wedding, and about 500 selfies of her looking tragic in headscarves. I mean, talk about handing the sniper the bullets. I told her I would be honored. I told her I would make it a masterpiece. And I meant it. I spent the next 3 nights locked in my bedroom, working on my laptop. I didn't just throw some slides together. I treated this like a forensic reconstruction. I opened up my video editing software. I used Premiere Pro because I wanted frame-by-perfect control, and I started building the timeline. The first 3 minutes were exactly what she wanted. I put in the baby pictures. I put in the photos of us on vacation. I overlaid the sappy music. It was designed to make people cry. I wanted the audience to be emotionally open, vulnerable, and completely off guard. I color graded the photos to look warm and nostalgic. And then, at the 3-minute and 40-second mark, right when the song hits its crescendo, I added the cut. I didn't want it to be subtle. I inserted a hard glitch effect, like the file was corrupted. The screen would go black for 2 seconds of dead silence. No music, no sound, just a void. And then the benign report would fade in. I spent hours on this one slide. I adjusted the contrast so the white background of the document popped against the dark room. I added a slow zoom effect that started wide on the full page and then pushed in, slow and steady, until the word benign took up the entire frame. I set the duration for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a long time in a video. It's long enough for confusion to turn into realization. Have you ever planned something so destructive that you felt a weird mix of guilt and absolute thrill, like you were standing on the edge of a cliff? After the medical report, I added the bank statements. I used a split-screen effect. On the left, the GoFundMe deposits labeled Martha's Medical Fund. On the right, the Royal Caribbean receipts and the Ticketmaster confirmation. I highlighted the dates in bright red so no one could miss that they matched perfectly. I rendered the video in 4K. I watched it back 20 times. Every time the music cut out and that document appeared, I got goosebumps. It was brutal. It was undeniable. It was perfect. The hardest part was the waiting. The party was still 3 days away. I had to live in that house with her, knowing what I had on my hard drive. I had to bring her tea while she researched swimsuits for her cruise. I had to listen to her practice her speech in the mirror, rehearsing her brave survivor voice. It was excruciating. I felt like a double agent. Every time she looked at me, I thought she could see the betrayal on my face, but she didn't see anything. She only saw herself. She was so blinded by her own ego, so confident in her performance, that she never once suspected that the quiet, dutiful daughter in the corner was sharpening the axe. The night before the party, she asked to see the video. My heart stopped. I told her it wasn't rendered yet, that I wanted it to be a surprise. I told her, "Mom, you're going to be blown away. It reveals exactly who you are." She hugged me. She actually teared up and said, "I know you'll do me justice." I hugged her back, feeling the stiff frame of her shoulder blades, and I thought, "Yes, Mom, justice is exactly what I'm going to do." So, the night of the party arrived, and the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. My mom had rented out the ballroom of the local community center, but you wouldn't know it was a community center by looking at it. She had transformed the place. I'm talking floor-to-ceiling satin drapes, massive floral centerpieces with white lilies, which, honestly, smelled a little too much like a funeral parlor, and a literal champagne tower in the corner. I walked in, and my first thought was just the sheer math of it all. I looked at the catering spread, prime rib, shrimp cocktail, imported cheese, and my brain immediately started tallying the receipts. The venue rental was probably $2,000. The flowers were easily another $1,000. The food, $3,000, minimum. It was sickening. These people, our neighbors, my high school teachers, friends of the family who were on fixed incomes, were walking into a room paid for by their own charity. They thought they were donating to save a life, but they were actually just funding the party they were standing in. It was a Ponzi scheme with a dress code. The room was packed. There were probably 200 people there. Everyone was dressed in somber chic, lots of dark blues and grays, respectful but expensive. The vibe was this weird mix of celebration and preemptive mourning. People were hugging each other, whispering about how brave Martha was, wiping away tears before anything had even happened. And then she made her entrance. You have to understand, my mother didn't just walk into a room, she arrived. The double doors swung open, and the DJ, yes, she hired a DJ for a cancer fundraiser, faded the music down to this soft, acoustic guitar track. She was wearing a long, flowing velvet gown that hung loosely on her frame. She had done her makeup to emphasize her cheekbones, using contouring to make her face look gaunter. more skeletal. On her head, she wore a silk wrap, tied intricately to highlight the lack of hair underneath. She was leaning heavily on my brother's arm, taking these small, shuffling steps. The room went silent. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. I stood by the projector table in the back, my hand resting on the laptop, just watching her. It was a masterclass. She stopped every few feet to let people touch her hand or kiss her cheek. She would smile, this weak, beatific smile, like she was blessing them. She didn't look like a woman fighting for her life. She looked like a saint descending from the heavens. Have you ever watched someone you know intimately and realized that everything they are showing the world is a carefully constructed lie? I watched her hug Mrs. Gable, the elderly widow who lived down the street. Mrs. Gable had donated $500 last week. I knew for a fact that $500 was her grocery money for the month. My mom hugged her, whispered something that made the old woman sob, and then moved on to the next donor. It took everything I had not to scream. My hands were sweating so much I had to wipe them on my dress pants. The laptop hummed under my fingers, the play button on the video file just waiting for a single click. But I had to follow the protocol. I had to give her the out. I needed to know, for my own sanity, that there was absolutely no other way this could end. About 20 minutes before the speeches were set to start, I saw her slip into the small bridal suite off the main hallway to rest. I told the DJ to keep the music playing and followed her. I walked into the room. She was sitting on a velvet settee, checking her makeup in a compact mirror. And here's the thing. She wasn't slumped over in exhaustion. She was sitting bolt upright, aggressively reapplying lipstick. When she saw me, she didn't look relieved. She looked annoyed. She snapped the compact shut and asked me if the video was ready. She said she wanted to make sure the sound system was loud enough because she wanted people to really feel the impact. I closed the door and leaned against it. I looked at her. This woman who had raised me, who had bandaged my scraped knees, and I gave her one last chance. I kept my voice low. I basically told her that we didn't have to do this. I said we could go out there right now and tell everyone that the doctor called, that it was a miraculous misdiagnosis. I said we could return the money. I said we could say it was a benign cyst and turn this into a celebration of good news. I pleaded with her. I told her that if we stopped now, nobody had to get hurt. I was offering her a lifeline. I was offering to help her bury the lie. She looked at me in the mirror. She didn't turn around, and her eyes went cold, that shark-like deadness that I had seen in the garage. She laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. She told me to stop being so dramatic. She said I was always trying to ruin her moments because I was jealous of the attention. She said that nobody wants to hear about a benign cyst, and that I needed to grow up and support the family for once in my life. She basically told me that the truth was boring, and that she was giving these people what they paid for, a hero. That was it. That was the trigger. She didn't care about the fraud. She didn't care about the theft. She only cared about the applause. I didn't argue. I didn't fight back. I just nodded, unlocked the door, and said, "Okay, Mom, you're right. Let's give them exactly what they paid for." I walked back out to the main hall. The air felt different now, and the guilt was gone. The hesitation was gone. I walked to the tech booth, checked the connection to the massive projector screen that hung behind the stage, and waited. 10 minutes later, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium. My mom walked up the stairs, miraculously finding the strength to stand alone for the limelight. She leaned into the microphone. Her voice was breathless, practiced. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about the dark nights of the soul. She talked about the fear of not seeing her next birthday. She pointed to the back of the room, to me, and publicly thanked Rock, her daughter, for standing by her side through the chemotherapy that never happened. The crowd applauded. People turned to look at me, beaming with admiration. I forced a smile. And then, she said the words that sealed her fate. She looked out at the crowd, tears glistening in her eyes, and said that while the road ahead was expensive and uncertain, she knew that with their financial help tonight, she could beat this. She asked them to open their hearts and their wallets one last time. Then she gestured to the screen. "My daughter has prepared a little tribute to my journey," she whispered. "Please, watch." I stood there in the darkness at the back of the room. I looked at her standing on that stage, bathed in the golden light of her own ego. I put my finger on the enter key. "Happy birthday, Mom," I thought. And I pressed play. So, the room was dark. The only light was coming from that massive 20-foot screen behind the stage. The music was swelling, that acoustic, tear-jerking version of a pop song that's designed to make you cry in grocery store commercials. And it was working. I stood in the back, next to the soundboard, and I watched the silhouette of the audience. I saw shoulders shaking. I saw people reaching for tissues. I saw Mrs. Gable clutching her purse to her chest, probably thinking about how noble it was that she gave her last few $100s to this cause. My mom was standing to the side of the stage, bathed in a soft spotlight. She was doing this pose, head bowed, hand over her heart, looking humble. She was basking in it. She was feeding on their pity like a vampire feeds on blood. It was visceral, and you could almost feel the energy in the room flowing toward her. I looked at the timeline on my laptop screen. The playhead was moving. 3:30, 3:31, 3:32. I remember taking a breath. It wasn't a deep breath. It was a shallow, sharp intake of air that got stuck in my throat. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew that in 30 seconds, my life as I knew it was going to be over. I knew that once this happened, I would never have a mother again. I would just have a defendant. Have you ever watched a car crash happen in slow motion, where you see the glass shatter before you hear the sound? At 3:40, the music didn't fade out. It cut. Hard. The silence that followed was violent. It wasn't a quiet pause. It was a jarring mechanical error that made everyone in the room jump. The screen went pitch black. The beautiful, warm montage of baby photos vanished. For about 3 seconds, the room was confused. You could hear the murmur starting. People were whispering, asking if the power went out. My mom looked up, her humble survivor mask slipping for a split second into a look of irritation. She actually gestured to the DJ booth, making a fix-it motion with her hand. And then, the image flickered back on. It wasn't a photo. It was the PDF. I had formatted it so the white background was blindingly bright in the dark room. It lit up the faces of the audience like a lightning strike. The text was crisp, high-contrast black. And because I had zoomed in, the word benign wasn't just text. It was a monolith. It was 10 feet tall. The sound in the room changed instantly. It went from the soft rustle of confusion to this sharp collective intake of breath. It sounded like the air had been sucked out of the building. I watched the eyes of the front row. I watched the car dealership owner, Mr. Henderson. I saw him squint, leaning forward. I saw his lips move as he read the word. I saw his expression shift from confusion to disbelief. Then, the slide changed. I didn't give them time to process it. Bam. The split screen. On the left, GoFundMe withdrawal, $5,000. On the right, Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, deposit confirmed. On the left, GoFundMe withdrawal, $800. On the right, Ticketmaster, Adele, VIP package. The red highlights I had added pulsed on the screen. It looked like an indictment. And here is where it gets chaotic. The reaction wasn't immediate screaming. It was this ripple effect. The people in the front row figured it out first, then the people behind them. It was like a wave of realization crashing through the room. Wait, what is that? Someone whispered loudly. Is that a cruise receipt? Someone else said, their voice rising. My mom was the last to know. Because she was facing the audience, she didn't see the screen behind her. She only saw their faces changing. She saw the pity evaporate. She saw the admiration turn into something ugly. She looked confused, smiling nervously, trying to laugh it off. She actually stepped back to the microphone and tried to make a joke about technical difficulties. But then she turned around. I will never, as long as I live, forget the look on her face when she saw her own bank statement projected on a 20-foot wall. Her knees actually gave out. It wasn't a fake faint this time. It was real, biological shock. She stumbled back, grabbing the podium for support, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She didn't look sad. She looked exposed. It was the look of a cockroach when you turn the kitchen lights on. The room exploded. It wasn't a riot, but it was close. The polite, somber atmosphere vanished. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up. The murmurs turned into shouting. Mr. Henderson, the biggest donor, was the first one to approach the stage. He didn't look like a nice neighbor anymore. He looked like a man who had been conned out of $5,000. He walked right up to the edge of the stage and pointed a shaking finger at the screen. He was demanding to know what that was. He was yelling about the dates. He was screaming that he knew that doctor, that he played golf with that doctor, and that he was going to call him right now. My mom panicked. She tried to grab the microphone again. And this is the part that makes me sick to remember. She tried to lie even then. She started stammering into the mic. She wasn't making sense. And she was saying that the document was fake, that I had photoshopped it. She pointed to the back of the room, at me, and screamed that I was mentally unstable. She basically tried to throw me under the bus in real time. She claimed I was jealous of her attention and that I had hacked the presentation to hurt her. I stood there in the booth, perfectly still. I didn't defend myself. I didn't have to. The receipts were still up on the screen behind her, cycling through every single purchase. The designer bags, the spa treatments, the expensive wine. The crowd turned on her. You have to understand, these people felt betrayed in a way that goes beyond money. They had cried for her. They had prayed for her. They had felt holy for helping her. And now they realized they were just ATMs for her vacation. The shame they felt turned into pure, unadulterated rage. People started walking out. Mrs. Gable was crying, but it wasn't soft crying anymore. She was sobbing into her hands, being led out by her daughter who was glaring at my mother with pure hatred. My mom realized she was losing the room. She ran off the stage. She didn't run to the exit, she ran to me. She stormed into the tech booth, her velvet dress trailing behind her, her face twisted into this mask of absolute fury. She cornered me against the soundboard. She was shaking, but not from palsy, from rage. She got right in my face. I could smell the expensive champagne on her breath. She started hissing at me. She didn't scream, because she didn't want the room to hear the specifics, but she was whispering venom. She asked me how I could do this to my own mother. She called me an ungrateful snake. She asked me if I was happy now that I had ruined the family name. She was desperate, clawing at my arm, her nails digging into my skin, demanding that I turn it off. She begged me to get on the mic and tell everyone it was a prank. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had let me shave my own head in solidarity with her lie, which I almost did. Thank God I didn't. I looked at the woman who took money from a widow. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I felt incredibly cold, like ice water was running through my veins. I leaned in close so only she could hear me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just delivered the receipt. You wanted to be the center of attention, Mom, I said. Now you finally are. She froze. The color drained out of her face completely. And then came the lights. Not the stage lights. The blue and red strobe lights flashing through the windows of the community center. I had called the non-emergency line about an hour ago. I told them there was a fraud in progress involving a substantial amount of money and multiple victims. But I guess Mr. Henderson had called someone too, because 2 uniformed officers walked through the double doors. The room went silent again. The police didn't draw guns or anything dramatic. They just walked up the center aisle, looking tired. They approached the tech booth where we were standing. My mom tried to pivot immediately. She saw the badges and her victim persona snapped back into place. She grabbed her chest. She started doing the breathless voice again. She basically threw herself at the nearest officer, crying that she was being harassed, that her daughter was abusing her, that she was a cancer patient who needed protection. The officer didn't blink. He just looked past her, at the giant screen that was still projecting the words, benign and cruise line. He looked back at her. He asked her, very politely, if she was Martha. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, giving the performance of her life. He asked her to turn around and put her hands behind her back. You should have heard the sound she made. It wasn't a scream. It was this high-pitched, indignant squawk. She tried to pull away. She tried to say she was too frail to be handcuffed. She claimed her bones were brittle from the chemo, and the officer wasn't buying it. He turned her around. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the quiet room. It was the loudest sound I've ever heard. As they walked her out, her headscarf, the silk one she had tied so carefully to elicit sympathy, slipped. It slid off her head and fell onto the dirty floor of the community center. She wasn't bald because of chemo. She was bald because she had shaved her head. And seeing her there, with the stubble growing back in uneven patches, without the scarf to frame it. She didn't look like a saint. She looked like a convict. The guests parted like the Red Sea to let the officers pass. Nobody said a word to her. No one reached out to touch her hand. They just watched with this mixture of disgust and fascination. I stayed in the booth. I watched them lead her out the double doors, hem past the champagne tower she had bought with their money. I looked back at the laptop. I closed the media player. The screen went black. I packed up my computer, put it in my bag, and walked out the back exit. I didn't talk to anyone. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get the key in the ignition for a full minute. I sat there in the dark parking lot, listening to the sirens fade away, and I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited to feel bad about sending my own mother to jail, but the guilt never came. Basically, the fallout wasn't an explosion. It was a long, slow suffocation. You might think that after a night like that, there would be this big dramatic trial where she confessed and begged for forgiveness, but narcissists don't work like that. They double down. Even in the back of the squad car, she was reportedly telling the officers that this was all a misunderstanding, that the funds were merely reallocated for her mental health, which was part of her holistic healing. She didn't get away with it, though. Mr. Henderson, the car dealership owner, was not a man you wanted as an enemy. He organized the other donors. They filed a class action lawsuit for fraud and theft by deception. Because the amount was over $20,000 and involved interstate wire transfers, thanks to GoFundMe, it became a felony case. The legal fees alone destroyed her. She had to sell the house I grew up in, the house where she had staged her little bravery bash. I remember driving by the day the for sale sign went up. It didn't look like a tragedy. It looked like a correction. The proceeds from the sale went almost entirely to restitution. She had to pay back every single cent. The $5 from the mailman, the $5,000 from Mr. Henderson, even the money for the champagne tower. She avoided prison time by pleading no contest and agreeing to probation and community service, mostly because the judge took pity on her age. But honestly, prison might have been easier for her. The social sentence was a life term. In our town, she became a pariah. She couldn't walk into the grocery store without people turning their carts around to avoid her. And she was kicked out of the church group. Her friends blocked her numbers. She went from being the local saint to being the local ghost. Nobody shouted at her in the streets. They just erased her. It was the one thing she feared more than death: irrelevance. Have you ever realized that the worst punishment you can inflict on an attention seeker is simply silence? I visited her once, about 3 months after the sentencing. She was living in a small, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place with thin walls and the smell of someone else's cooking constantly in the hallway. I walked in, and the place was cluttered with the few things she had managed to keep. She was sitting in a recliner, watching daytime TV. She looked older. The fake cancer didn't age her, but the real consequences did. I expected her to be angry. I expected her to scream at me. But she didn't. She just looked at me with this mix of confusion and pity. She started talking, and it was chilling. She basically rewrote history right in front of me. She told me that she really did believe she was sick. She said the stress must have manifested as symptoms, and that I was cruel for exposing her mental break to the world. She said she forgave me for humiliating her, implying that I was the one who had sinned. She was still the victim. She would always be the victim. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to correct her. I didn't feel the need to fight for the truth. I realized that her reality was a prison she had built for herself, and she was never getting out. I put a bag of groceries on her counter. Just basics. Bread and milk, because I'm not a monster. I turned to leave. She called out after me. She asked if I was going to come back for Thanksgiving. She asked it casually, like she hadn't stolen $20,000 and tried to frame me for it. I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. I just said, "No, Mom. I have plans." I didn't have plans. I just had peace. I walked out to my car, and the air smelled like rain. It was crisp and clean. I sat in the driver's seat and checked my bank account. It was modest, but it was mine. No hidden transfers. No lies. No debt. I drove away, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror. People always ask me if I regret doing it so publicly. They ask if I could have handled it quietly, saved the family embarrassment. And honestly, sometimes I wonder that too. But then I remember the look on Mrs. Ning Gable's face when she got her money back. I remember the silence of the house when I finally moved into my own place. My mother spent her whole life pretending to fight a sickness for attention. In the end, I realized she was right about one thing. There was a sickness in our house. It just wasn't cancer. It was her. And cutting it out was the only way to survive.